Gaikar pawns in the game Chapter 2. The English Revolution 1640 to 1660. The forces of evil realized that in order to win undisputed control of the material assets of the world, and establish an atheistic materialistic
totalitarian dictatorship, it is necessary to destroy all forms of constitutional government and organized religion. In order to do this, the forces of evil decided they must divide the peoples of the world against each other on various issues. Dating back into antiquity, the Aryan and Semitic races were driven into enmity against each other to serve the secret ambitions of their atheistic materialistic leaders. The people of the Aryan and Semitic races remained steadfast to their belief in God, and faithful to his commandments. The forces of evil could never have accomplished their evil purpose. The term Aryan actually denotes the lingual groups otherwise known as Indo-European or Indo-Germanic. It comprises two groups: the Western or European, and the Eastern or Armenian. The Aryan languages show a common origin by their vocabulary, system, and inflections. Actually, the word Aryan means an honorable lord of the soil. Thus it is that most leaders of the Aryan group in Europe were landed barons who maintained strong armed forces to protect their properties. From amongst these barons came the Aryan warlords. They in turn organized Nazism, and used fascism, and all anti-Semitic groups right of center to serve their purpose, and further their secret plans for world domination. The chief divisions of the Aryan groups are the Teutonic, the Romanic, and the Slavic races, who settled in Western Europe. The Turks, the Magyars, the Basques, and the Finns are known Aryan races. The common ancestors of the Aryan groups dwelt among the Pamirs at a period of remote antiquity. On the other hand, the Semitic groups are actually divided into two sections. One includes the Assyrian, the Aramean, the Hebrew, and Phoenician groups. The other section includes the Arabic and Ethiopian groups. The Arabic is the most copious group, and the Aramean the poorest. The Hebrews occupy an intermediary position. Jewry. Today the term Jew is used very loosely to define people who have at one time or another embraced the Jewish faith. Many of these are not actually Semitic in racial origin. A great number of people who accepted the Jewish faith are descendants of the Herodians, who were Edomians of Turkish-Mongol blood. They are actually Edomites. The important fact to remember is that among the Jewish leaders, in exactly the same way as among the Aryan leaders, there always has been a small, hard core of men who have been, and still are, Illuminists or atheists. They may have given lip service to the Jewish or Christian religions to suit their own purpose, but they never believed in the existence of God. They are internationalists now. They give allegiance to no particular nation, although they have used, on occasion, nationalism to further their causes. Their only concern is to gain greater economic and political power. The ultimate objective of the leaders of both groups is identical. They are determined to win, for themselves, undisputed control of the wealth, natural resources, and manpower of the entire world. They intend to turn the world into their conception of a totalitarian godless dictatorship. The non-Semitic and Turk-Finnish races infiltrated into Europe from Asia about the 1st century after the advent of Christ. They took the land route north of the Caspian Sea. These peoples are referred to in history as Khazars. They were a pagan people. They settled in Eastern Europe and established the powerful Khazar kingdom. They expanded their domains by military conquests until, by the end of the 8th century, they occupied the greater portion of Eastern Europe west of the Ural Mountains, and north of the Black Sea. The Khazars ultimately accepted Judaism as their religion in preference to Christianity or Mohammedanism. Synagogues, and schools for teaching Judaism, were built throughout their kingdom. At the peak of their power, the Khazars were collecting tribute from 25 conquered peoples. The Great Khazar Kingdom flourished for almost 500 years. Then, towards the end of the 10th century, the Khazars were defeated in battle by the Varangians, Russians, who swept down upon them from the north. The conquest of the Khazars was completed by the end of the 13th century. The revolutionary movement inspired by the Khazar Jews went on within the Russian Empire from the 13th century until the Red October Revolution of 1917. The conquest of the Khazars in the 13th century explains how so many people, now commonly referred to as Jews, remained within the Russian Empire. There is one other important fact which sheds light on the subject of Aryanism and Semitism. The Finns, and other groups generally classified as Varangians, Russians, were of non-Aryan origin, and the German people generally speaking have treated them as enemies. One act of Christ has a great deal of importance in the study of the world revolutionary movement. Christ was considered by many a radical who based his reform movement on the worship of Almighty God, obedience to constituted authority, and love of one's neighbors. The story of the life of Christ shows that he loved all people except one particular group. He hated the money-lenders with an intensity that seems strange in a man of so mild a character. Jesus repeatedly admonished the money-lenders for their practice of usury. He publicly denounced them as worshippers of mammon. He said they were of the synagogue of Satan. Revelation 2:9. He emphatically expressed his extreme hatred of the money-lenders when he took a whip and drove them out of the temple. He admonished them in these words, "This temple was built as the house of God, but you have turned it into a den of thieves." By performing this act of vengeance on the money-lenders, Christ signed his own death warrant. It was the Illuminati, and the false priests and elders in their pay, who hatched the plot by which Christ would be executed by the Roman soldiers. It was they who supplied the 30 pieces of silver used to bribe Judas. It was they who used their propagandists to misinform and mislead the mob. It was the agents of the Illuminati who led the mob when they accepted Barabbas and screamed that Christ be crucified. It was the Illuminati who arranged matters so that the Roman soldiers acted as their executioners. Then, after the foul deed had been done, and they had had their revenge, the conspirators stepped into the background and let their guilt rest on the masses of the Jews and their children. History proves they had a fiendish reason for putting the guilt for the death of Christ on the Jewish people. History proves that they intended to use the hate engendered amongst the Jewish people as the result of persecution, to serve their vile purposes, and further their secret totalitarian ambitions. Christ knew all these things. He made his knowledge known in the most dramatic manner possible. As he hung dying on the cross, he prayed to his heavenly Father and he said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Surely he was praying for the mob? He was asking forgiveness for the men who had been used by the Illuminati to be the instrument of their revenge. History proves the international money-lenders have been using the mob to further their secret ambitions ever since. In the Lenin Institute in Moscow, the professors who lecture to aspiring revolutionary leaders from all over the world invariably refer to the masses as the mob. The Illuminati direct all evil forces. Study of the World Revolutionary Movement, WRM, from the time of Christ to the present day, proves that it is unjust to blame the whole Jewish race for the crimes committed against humanity by a small group of false priests and money-lenders. These men always have been, and still are, the secret power behind internationalism. They use communism today as their manual of action to further their secret plans for ultimate world domination. Study of history will prove that it is equally unjust to blame the whole German and Italian people for the crimes against humanity committed by the small group of Aryan warlords who organized Nazism, in the hope that they could defeat international communism and political Zionism and give them world domination by military conquest. History proves clearly that the leaders of the two opposing groups have divided the masses of the people regardless of race, color, or creed, into two opposing camps and then used them all as pawns in the game of international chess. They play to decide which group will ultimately defeat the other and establish, once and for all, undisputed control over the world, its wealth, its natural resources, its manpower, and its religion. It must be remembered that as the purpose of the devil is to win men's souls away from God, Satan uses both red communism and black Nazism to influence the minds of men so that they will embrace either atheistic ideology. Those who accept either atheistic ideology sell their souls to the devil. Historical events prove the continuity of the evil purpose of the Illuminati. Many theologians agree that this perfect continuity of their long-range plans is positive evidence that they are, as Christ named them, of the synagogue of Satan. Theologians base their opinion on the theory that nothing human could have such a continuing record of evil down through the ages of time. The continuity of evil is the exact opposite of the apostolic succession of the Roman Catholic Church. In this, as in many other things, we are forcibly reminded of the actual power of the supernatural forces to influence our individual lives, national policy, and international affairs. Arguments of this kind regarding evil-minded Jews are equally applicable to evil-minded Aryans, and evil-minded men of all races, color, and creeds. History proves that Seneca, 4 BC to 65 AD, died because he, like Christ, tried to expose the corrupt practices and evil influence of the money-lenders who had infiltrated into the Roman Empire. Seneca was a famous Roman philosopher. He was chosen tutor to Nero, who became emperor of Rome. For a long time Seneca was Nero's best friend, and most trusted advisor. Nero married Poppaea, who brought him under the evil influence of the money-lenders. Nero became one of the most infamous rulers the world has ever known. His licentious conduct, and depraved habits, developed in him a character so base that he lived only to persecute and destroy everything that was good. His acts of revenge took the form of atrocities usually committed in public upon the victims of his wrath. Seneca lost his influence over Nero, but he never stopped publicly denouncing the money-lenders for their evil influence and corrupt practices. Finally, the money-lenders demanded that Nero take action against Seneca, who was very popular with the people. So as not to arouse the wrath of the people against himself and the money-lenders, Nero ordered Seneca to end his own life. */ Too bad evil empire. Rome was an empire of the money power, the same international money power which later resurrected it as the British Empire. This is the first recorded case in which the money-lenders made a person commit suicide because he had become troublesome to them, but it was by no means the last. History records dozens of similar suicides, and murders which were made to appear as accidents or suicides. One of the most notorious in recent years was that of James V. Forrestal. In 1945, Forrestal had been convinced that the American bankers were closely affiliated with the international bankers who controlled the banks of England, France, and other countries. He was also convinced, according to his diaries, that the international money barons were the Illuminati and directly responsible for the outbreak of World Wars I and II. He tried to convince President Roosevelt, and other top-level government officials, of the truth. Either he failed, and committed suicide in a fit of depression, or he was murdered to shut his mouth forever. Murder, made to appear like suicide, has been accepted policy in the top levels of international intrigue for many centuries. 3*/ Where in his diaries did Mr. Forrestal mention the Illuminati? And why would he want to convince Roosevelt of the truth when Roosevelt and co. worked out and implemented the plan to instigate WW2? Justinian I, Flavius Anicius Justinianus 483 to 565 AD, wrote his famous book of law Corpus Juris Civilis. He tried to put an end to the illegal methods of traffic and trade indulged in by certain Jewish merchants. By engaging in illegal trade and wholesale smuggling, the Jewish merchants, who were only agents of the Illuminati, obtained unfair advantage over their Gentile competitors. They put them out of business. The Book of Law, written by Justinian, was accepted as the textbook of law right down to the 10th century. Even today it is considered the most important of all documents of jurisprudence. But the money-lenders were able to offset the good Justinian tried to do. For Funk and Vignal's Jewish Encyclopedia has this to say about the Jews in those days: they enjoyed full religious liberty. Minor offices were open to them. The trade in slaves constituted the main source of livelihood for the Roman Jews, and decrees against this traffic were issued in 335, 336, 339, 384 AD, etc. There is the story in black and white. But history reveals that the Jewish merchants and money-lenders did not confine their illegal activities to the slave trade. It is recorded that they engaged in every form of illegal traffic, including the drug trade, prostitution, wholesale smuggling of liquors, perfumes, jewels, and other dutiable goods. In order to protect their illegal trade and traffic, they bribed and corrupted officials. By use of drugs and liquors, and women, they destroyed the morals of the people. History records that Justinian, although emperor of the Roman Empire, wasn't strong enough to put a stop to their activities. 51 Edward Gibbon, 1737 to 1794, deals with the corrupting influence of the Jewish merchants and money-lenders. He credits them with contributing greatly to the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. He wrote the book with that title. Gibbon gives considerable space to the part Poppaea, Nero's wife, played in bringing about the conditions which started the people of Rome reeling drunkenly towards their own destruction. With the fall of the Roman Empire, Jewish predominance was established. The nations of Europe entered into what historians name the Dark Ages. The Encyclopaedia Britannica has this to say on the subject. There was an inevitable tendency for them, the Jewish merchants and money-lenders, to specialize in commerce for which their acumen and ubiquity gave them special qualifications. In the Dark Ages, the commerce of Western Europe was largely in their hands, in particular, the slave trade. Jewish control of trade and commerce, both legal and illegal, grew tighter and tighter. It spread far and wide, until every European country's economy was more or less in their hands. Evidence in the form of Polish and Hungarian coins bearing Jewish inscriptions gives some indication of the power they exerted in financial matters during those days. The fact that the Jews made a special effort to issue and control currency supports the opinion that the money-lenders had adopted the slogan "Let us issue and control the money of a nation and we care not who make its laws," long before Amschelmeyer Bauer 61, 1743–1812, used the slogan to explain to his co-conspirators the reason the Jewish money-lenders had obtained control of the Bank of England in 1694. The barons, who were the leaders of Arianism, determined they would break the Jewish control of trade, commerce, and money in Europe. It was with this purpose in mind that in 1095 they obtained the support of certain Christian rulers to start the Crusades or Holy Wars. Between 1095 and 1271 8 crusades were organized. Officially, the Crusades were military expeditions undertaken to ensure the safety of pilgrims who wished to visit the Holy Sepulchre and set up Christian rule in Palestine. In actual fact, they were wars fomented for the purpose of dividing the population of Europe into two camps. One camp pro-Jewish and the other anti-Jewish. In more recent years, the secret powers divided the white race into Semitic and anti-Semitic groups. Some of the Crusades were successful, some were not. The net result was that, in 1271, Palestine still remained in the hands of the infidels, although the countries of Christendom had spent millions in money and treasure to finance the Crusades and sacrificed millions of human lives fighting those holy wars. Strange to relate, the Jewish money lenders grew richer and stronger than ever. There is one phase of the Crusades which must not be overlooked when the causes are being studied in relation to the effects they produced in later years. In 1215 the Roman Catholic hierarchy held the Fourth Lateran Council. The main topic under consideration was Jewish aggression in all the countries of Europe. During this period of history, the rulers of the Church and the rulers of the state worked in unity. The rulers of the Church, after due deliberation, expressed themselves in favor of continuing the Crusades. They also drew up and passed decrees designed to put an end to usury and the Jewish money-lenders' practice of using unethical methods in traffic and trade to obtain unfair advantage over Gentile competitors, and to curb corrupt and immoral practices. To achieve this purpose, the dignitaries attending the Fourth Lateran Council decreed that in the future the Jews be restricted to living in their own quarters. Jews were absolutely prohibited from hiring Christians as their employees. This decree was passed because Jewish money-lenders and merchants operated on the joint stock company principle. They employed Christians to act as their front men while they hid in the background directing operations. This was convenient because, when anything went wrong, the Christian front men got the blame and the punishment, while they got off scot-free. In addition, by the decrees, Jews were absolutely prohibited from employing Christian females in their homes and establishments. This decree was passed because evidence was produced to prove that young females were systematically seduced, and then turned into prostitutes. Their masters used them to obtain control over influential officials. Other decrees made it unlawful for Jews to engage in many commercial activities. But even the power of the Church, supported by most Christian officials of the state, could not make the money barons amenable to the law. All the decrees accomplished was to intensify the hatred the Illuminati had for the Church of Christ, and they started a continuing campaign to separate the church from the state. To achieve this purpose, they introduced the idea of secularism amongst the laity. In 1253, the French government ordered the Jews expelled because they refused to obey the law. Most of the Jews who were expelled went over to England. By 1255, the Jewish moneylenders had obtained absolute control of many church dignitaries and most of the nobility. 81 That the moneylenders, the rabbis, and elders belonged to the Illuminati was proved by evidence given during the investigation ordered by King Henry III into the ritual slaying of St. Hugh of Lincoln in 1255. 18 Jews were proved to have been the culprits. They were tried, found guilty, and executed. In 1272 King Henry died. Edward I became King of England. He determined the Jewish leaders must give up the practice of usury. In 1275 he had Parliament pass the Statutes of Jewry. They were designed to curb the power Jewish usurers were exerting over their debtors, both Christians and fellow Jews. The Statutes of Jewry were probably the first legislation in which the Commons in Parliament had an active part. They cannot be classified as anti-Semitic because they actually protected the interests of honest and law-abiding Jews. 9L But, as had happened so often before, the Jewish moneylenders thought that the power they could exert over both the church and the state would permit them to defy the king's decree in the same way as they had set at naught those passed by the Lateran Council. They made a grave mistake. In 1290 King Edward issued another decree. All Jews were expelled from England. This was the start of what historians call the Great Eviction. After Edward I started the ball rolling, all the crowned heads of Europe followed his example. In 1306 France expelled the Jews. In 1348 Saxony followed suit. In 1360 Hungary, in 1370 Belgium, in 1380 Slovakia, in 1420 Austria, in 1444 the Netherlands, in 1492 Spain. The expulsion of the Jews from Spain has special signification. It throws light on the Spanish Inquisition. Most people have the idea the Inquisition was instituted by Roman Catholics to persecute Protestants who had broken away from the Church. As a matter of fact, the Inquisition, as introduced by Pope Innocent III, was a means of unmasking heretics and infidels, who were masquerading as Christians for the purpose of destroying the Christian religion from within. It didn't make the slightest difference to the inquisitors whether the accused was Jew or Gentile, black or white. The terrible ceremony of the auto de fe or act of faith was specially designed to be used in connection with the execution of all convicted heretics and infidels, when Torquemada, 1420 to 1498, was Grand Inquisitor. It is these hidden incidents which reveal so much truth. It was in Spain, during the 14th century, that the Jewish moneylenders first succeeded in having the loans they made the state secure by the right to collect the taxes levied upon the people. They used such cruelty, when demanding their pound of flesh, that it only required the inflammatory oratory of the priest Fernando Martinet to produce mass action which ended in one of the bloodiest massacres recorded in history. Here again is a perfect example of how thousands of innocent Jews were victimized, for the sins and crimes committed against humanity by just a few. Ri2I in 1495 Lithuania expelled the Jews. In 1498 Portugal, in 1540 Italy, in 1551 Bavaria. It is important to remember that during the general evictions certain wealthy and influential Jews managed to obtain sanctuary in Bordeaux, Avignon, certain papal states, Marseille, northern Alsace, and part of northern Italy. But, as stated in the Encyclopaedia Britannica, the masses of the Jewish people were thus to be found once more, in the East and in the Polish and Turkish empires. The few communities suffered to remain in Western Europe were meantime subjected at last to all the restrictions which earlier ages had usually allowed to remain as an ideal, so that, in a sense, the Jewish Dark Ages may be said to begin with the Renaissance. This admission would indicate there is some justification for the claim made by certain historians that not until the Western European nations wrested economic control from the Jewish moneylenders did the rebirth of Western civilization occur. Following the Great Eviction, the Jews again resumed living in ghettos or kahals. Thus, isolated from the masses of the population, the Jews were under the direction and control of the rabbis and elders, many of whom were influenced by the Illuminati and the wealthy Jewish moneylenders who remained in their various sanctuaries. In the ghettos, agents of the Illuminati inspired a spirit of hatred and revenge in the hearts of the Jewish people against those who had evicted them. The rabbis reminded them that, as the chosen people of God, the day would come when they would have their revenge and inherit the earth. It should be mentioned that most Jews who settled in Eastern Europe were restricted to living within the Pale of Settlement located on the western borders of Russia and extending from the shores of the Baltic Sea in the north to the shores of the Black Sea in the south. Most of them were Khazar Jews. Ri3L. The Khazar Jews were noted for their Yiddish culture, their rapacious practices in financial matters, and their lack of ethics in commercial transactions. They should not be confused with the biblical Hebrews, who are mild-mannered and, generally speaking, pastoral people. Within the ghettos, in an atmosphere of hatred, the desire for revenge was developed by the agents of the Illuminati. They organized these negative conditions into the World Revolutionary Movement, based on terrorism. From its very inception, the international-minded money barons and their high priests designed, financed, and controlled the World Revolutionary Movement. They used it as the instrument by which they would obtain their revenge on the Christian churches and the crowned heads of Europe. History proves how the money barons developed the revolutionary movement into international communism as we know it today. They organized individual acts of terrorism into a disciplined revolutionary movement. They then planned systematic infiltration of the Jews back into the countries from which they had been expelled. Because their re-entry was illegal, the only method by which infiltration could be accomplished was to establish Jewish undergrounds. Because the Jews who infiltrated into the undergrounds of the European cities could not obtain lawful employment, they were supplied with funds with which to develop the black market system. They indulged in every kind of illegal traffic and trade. Working on the principle of the joint stock co., the identity of the money barons, who owned and controlled this vast underground system, always remained secret. Ri4I Count de Ponsonby, Mrs. Nesta Webster, Sir Walter Scott, and many other authors and historians have suspected that the Illuminati and a group of internationalists were the secret power behind the World Revolutionary Movement, but it was not until recently that sufficient evidence was pieced together to prove that what they suspected was an actual fact. As the events of history are unrolled in their chronological sequence, it will be seen how the Illuminati used the Semitic groups and the Aryan groups to serve their purpose, and involved millions upon millions of people in revolutions and wars to further their own secret and selfish ambitions. William Foss and Cecil Girardi, who wrote The Spanish Arena, said, "The question of who are the leading figures behind the attempt of the joint stock company domination of the world, and how they obtain their ends, is beyond the scope of this book. But it is one of the important livres affaire yet to be written. It will have to be written by a man of the highest courage, who will count his life as nothing compared with enlightening the world as to what the satanic self-appointed priesthood would ordain." How successful the plan, to infiltrate back into the countries from which they had been expelled, turned out to be can best be judged by the following records. The Jews were back in England in 1600, back in Hungary in 1500. They were expelled again in 1582, they were back in Slovakia in 1562 but were expelled again in 1744, they were back in Lithuania in 1700. But, regardless of how many times they were expelled, there always remained the Jewish underground from which the revolutionary activities of the secret powers were conducted. Because King Edward I of England had been the first to expel the Jews, the Jewish money barons in France, Holland, and Germany decided it would be poetic justice if they tried out their planned revolutionary technique in England first. They used their underground agents, or cells, to cause trouble between the king and his government, employers and labor, ruling class and workers, church and state. The plotters injected controversial issues into politics and religion, to divide the people into two opposing camps. £15 First they divided the people in England into Catholics and Protestants, then they divided the Protestants into conformists and nonconformists. When King Charles I was brought into disagreement with his parliament, a Jewish money baron in Holland, named Manasseh ben Israel, had his agents contact Oliver Cromwell. They offered him large sums of money if he would carry out their plan to overthrow the British throne. Manasseh ben Israel, and other German and French money-lenders financed Cromwell. Fernandez Carvajal of Portugal, often referred to in history as the Great Jew, became Cromwell's chief military contractor. He reorganized the Roundheads into a model army. He provided them with the best arms and equipment money could buy. Once the conspiracy was underway, hundreds of trained revolutionaries were smuggled into England and were absorbed into the Jewish underground. The same thing goes on in America today. The head of the Jewish underground in England at that time was a Jew named de Souza. The Great Jew, Fernandez Carvajal, had used his influence to have de Souza appointed Portuguese ambassador. It was in his house, protected by diplomatic immunity, that the leaders of the Jewish revolutionary underground remained hidden and worked out their plots and intrigue. R161 Once the revolution had been decided upon, the Jewish plotters introduced Calvinism into England to split church and state, and divide the people. Contrary to general belief, Calvinism is of Jewish origin. It was deliberately conceived to split the adherents of the Christian religions, and divide the people. Calvin's real name was Cohen. When he went from Geneva to France to start preaching his doctrine, he became known as Aryan. Then in England it became Calvin. History proves that there is hardly a revolutionary plot that wasn't hatched in Switzerland. There is hardly a Jewish revolutionary leader who hasn't changed his name. At the B'nai B'rith celebrations held in Paris, France, in 1936, Cohen, Calvin, or Calvin, whatever his name may have been, was enthusiastically acclaimed to have been of Jewish descent. 17 In addition to the religious controversy, the revolutionary leaders organized armed mobs to aggravate every situation injected into politics and labor by their masters. Isaac Disraeli, 17661848, a Jew, and father of Benjamin Disraeli, who afterwards became Lord Beaconsfield, deals with this angle of the British Revolution in detail in his 2-volume story The Life of Charles. He remarks that he obtained considerable information from the records of Melchior de Salem, a Jew, who was French envoy to the British government at that time. Disraeli draws attention to the great similarity, or pattern, of the revolutionary activities which preceded both the British and the French revolutions. In other words, the handiwork of the secret and real directors of the World Revolutionary Movement, WRM, could clearly be seen in both, a fact which we will proceed to prove. The evidence which absolutely convicts Oliver Cromwell of participating in the Jewish revolutionary plot was obtained by Lord Alfred Douglas, who edited a weekly review Plain English published by the North British Publishing Co. In an article which appeared in the issue of September 3, 1921, he explained how his friend, Mr. L.D. van Valkert of Amsterdam, Holland, had come into possession of a missing volume of records of the Synagogue of Muljaim. This volume had been lost during the Napoleonic Wars. The volume contains records of letters written to, and answered by the directors of the synagogue. They are written in German. One entry, dated June 16, 1647 reads, from O.C., i.e. Olivier Cromwell, to Ebenezer Pratt. In return for financial support will advocate admission of Jews to England. This, however, impossible while Charles living. Charles cannot be executed without trial, adequate grounds for which do not at present exist. Therefore advise that Charles be assassinated, but will have nothing to do with arrangements for procuring an assassin, though willing to help in his escape. In reply to this dispatch the records show E. Pratt wrote a letter dated July 12, 1647 addressed to Oliver Cromwell. Will grant financial aid as soon as Charles removed, and Jews admitted. Assassination too dangerous. Charles should be given an opportunity to escape. USL His recapture will then make trial and execution possible. The support will be liberal, but useless to discuss terms until trial commences. On November 12 that same year Charles was given the opportunity to escape. He was of course recaptured. Hollis and Ludlow, authorities on this chapter of history, are both on record as considering the flight as the stratagem of Cromwell. After Charles had been recaptured, events moved apace. Cromwell had the British Parliament purged of most members he knew were loyal to the king. Notwithstanding this drastic action, when the House sat all night on December 5, 1648, the majority agreed that the concessions offered by the king were satisfactory to a settlement. Any such settlement would have disqualified Cromwell from receiving the blood money promised him by the international money barons through their agent E. Pratt, so Cromwell struck again. He ordered Colonel Pride to purge Parliament of those members who had voted in favor of a settlement with the king. What then happened is referred to, in school history books, as Pride's Purge. 19 When the purge was finished, 50 members remained. They are recorded as the Rump Parliament. They usurped absolute power. On January 9, 1649, a High Court of Justice was proclaimed for the purpose of putting the King of England on trial. 2/3 of the members of the court were levellers from Cromwell's army. The conspirators couldn't find an English lawyer who would draw up a criminal charge against King Charles. Carvajal instructed an alien Jew, Isaac Doris Laus, Manasseh ben Israel's agent in England, to draw up the indictment upon which King Charles was tried. Charles was found guilty of the charges levelled against him by the international Jewish money lenders, not by the people of England. On January 30, 1649, he was publicly beheaded in front of the banqueting house at Whitehall, London. The Jewish money lenders, directed by the high priests of the Synagogue of Satan, had had their revenge because Edward I had expelled the Jews from England. Oliver Cromwell received his blood money just as Judas had done. History proves that the international Jewish money lenders had a purpose other than revenge for getting rid of Charles. They removed him to obtain control of England's economy and government. They planned to involve many European countries in war with England. Great sums of money are needed to fight wars. By loaning the crowned heads of Europe the money required to fight wars they fomented, the internationalists were enabled to rapidly increase the national debts of all European nations. The chronological sequence of events from the execution of King Charles in 1649 to the institution of the Bank of England in 1694, shows how the national debt was increased. The international bankers used intrigue and cunning to throw Christians at each other's throats. 1649 Cromwell, financed by Jews, waged war in Ireland. Captures Drogheda and Wexford. British Protestants blamed for persecution of Irish Catholics. 1650 Montrose in rebellion against Cromwell. Captured and executed. 1651 Charles II invades England. Defeated and flees back to France. 1652 England involved in war with Dutch. 1653 Cromwell proclaims himself Lord Protector of England. 1654 England involved in more wars. 1656 trouble started in American colonies. 1657 Death of Cromwell's son Richard named Protector. 1659 Richard, disgusted with intrigue, resigns. 1660 General Monk occupies London. Charles II proclaimed king. 1661 Truth revealed regarding intrigue entered into by Cromwell and his cohorts Ireton and Bradshaw, causes serious public reaction. Bodies are exhumed and hung from gallows on Tyburn Hill, London. 1662 Religious strife is engendered to divide members of the Protestant denominations. Nonconformists to the established Church of England are persecuted. 1664 England is again involved in war with Holland. 1665 A Great Depression settles over England. Unemployment and shortages of food undermine the health of the people and the Great Plague breaks out. 1666 England involved in war with France and Holland. 1667 Cabal agents start new religious and political strife. 1674 England and Holland make peace. The men directing international intrigue change their characters. They become matchmakers. They elevate plain Mr. William Stadtholder to the rank of Captain General of the Dutch forces. He became William Prince of Orange. It was arranged that he meet Mary, the eldest daughter of the Duke of York. The Duke was only one place removed from becoming King of England. 1677 Princess Mary of England married William Prince of Orange. To place William Prince of Orange upon the throne of England, it was necessary to get rid of both Charles II, and the Duke of York, who was slated to become James II. 1683 The Rye House plot was hatched. The intention was to assassinate both King Charles II and the Duke of York. It failed. 1685 King Charles II died. The Duke of York became King James II of England. Immediately a campaign of infamy was started against James II. The Duke of Monmouth was persuaded, or bribed, into leading an insurrection to overthrow the king. On June 30, the Battle of Sedgemoor was fought. Monmouth was defeated and captured. He was executed July 15. In August, Judge Jeffreys opened what historians have named the Bloody Assizes. Over 300 persons concerned in the Monmouth Rebellion were sentenced to death under circumstances of atrocious cruelty. Nearly 1,000 others were condemned to be sold as slaves. This was a typical example of how the secret powers, working behind the scenes, create conditions for which other people are blamed. Others are aroused to take active opposition against those they blame. They in turn are liquidated. King James still had to be disposed of before William of Orange could be placed on the throne to carry out their mandate. Every person in England was bewitched and bewildered. They were not allowed to know the truth. They blamed everyone, and everything except the secret powers who were pulling the strings. Then the conspirators made their next move. 1688 they ordered William Prince of Orange to land in England at Torbay. This he did on November 5. King James abdicated. He fled to France. He had become unpopular by reason of the campaign of infamy, intrigue, and his own foolishness and culpability. 1689 William of Orange and Mary were proclaimed King and Queen of England. King James did not intend to give up the throne without a fight. He was a Catholic, so the secret powers set up William of Orange as the champion of the Protestant faith. On February 15, 1689, King James landed in Ireland. The Battle of the Boyne was fought by men of definite, and opposing, religious convictions. The battle has been celebrated by Orangemen on the 12th of July ever since. There is probably not one Orangeman in 10,000 who knows that all the wars and rebellions fought from 1640 to 1689 were fomented by the international moneylenders for the purpose of putting themselves in position to control British politics and economy. Their first objective was to obtain permission to institute a Bank of England and consolidate and secure the debts Britain owed them for loans made to her to fight the wars they instigated. History shows how they completed their plans. In the final analysis, none of the countries and people involved in the wars and revolutions obtained any lasting benefits. No permanent or satisfactory solution was reached regarding the political, economic, and religious issues involved. The only people to benefit were the small group of moneylenders who financed the wars and revolutions, and their friends and agents, who supplied the armies, the ships, and the munitions. It is important to remember that no sooner was the Dutch general sitting upon the throne of England than he persuaded the British Treasury to borrow £1,250,000 from the Jewish bankers who had put him there. The school book history informs our children that the negotiations were conducted by Sir John Haugland and Mr. William Patterson on behalf of the British government with moneylenders whose identity remains secret. Search of historical documents reveals that in order to maintain complete secrecy, the negotiations regarding the terms of the loan were carried on in a church. In the days of Christ, the moneylenders used the temple. In the days of William of Orange, they desecrated a church. The international moneylenders agreed to accommodate the British Treasury to the extent of £1,250,000, providing they could dictate their own terms and conditions. This was agreed to. The terms were in part, 1. That the names of those who made the loan remain secret, and that they be granted a charter to establish a Bank of England. 221-2. That the directors of the Bank of England be granted the legal right to establish the gold standard for currency by which 3. They could make loans to the value of £10 for every £1 value of gold they had on deposit in their vaults. 4. That they be permitted to consolidate the national debt, and secure payment of amounts due as principal and interest by direct taxation of the people. Thus, for the sum of £1,250,000, King William of Orange sold the people of England into economic bondage. The Jewish money-lenders gained their ambitions. They had usurped the power to issue and control the currency of the nation. And, having secured that power, they cared not who made the laws. Just what the acceptance of the gold standard meant is best illustrated by citing a simple transaction. The directors of the Bank of England could loan £1,000 for every £100 worth of gold they had on deposit as security. They collected interest on the full £1,000 loan. At 5% this amounted to £50 a year. Therefore, at the end of the first year, the bankers collected back 50% of the amount they had originally put up to secure the loan. If a private individual wished to obtain a loan, the bankers made him put up security, in the form of property, stocks, or bonds, much in excess of the value of the loan he required. If he failed to meet payments of principal and interest, foreclosure proceedings were taken against his property, and the money-lenders obtained many times the value of the loan. The international bankers never intended that England be allowed to pay off the national indebtedness. The plan was to create international conditions which would plunge all nations concerned deeper and deeper into their debt. J23L. As far as England is concerned, in only 4 years, 1694 to 1698, the national debt was increased from £1 to £16 million sterling. This debt accumulated because of wars. It is interesting to note that John Churchill, 1650 to 1722, became the leading military figure during this period of English history. Because of his military genius, and his services to Britain, he was created the first Duke of Marlborough. R24L. The secret power behind the world revolutionary movement pulled the necessary strings and brought about the wars of the Spanish Succession. In 1701 the Duke of Marlborough was made Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Holland. No less an authority than the Jewish Encyclopedia records the fact that for his many services the Duke of Marlborough received not less than £6,000 a year from the Dutch Jewish banker, Solomon Medina. The events leading up to the French Revolution show how between 1698 and 1815 the national debt of Britain was increased to £885 million. By 1945 the British national debt had reached the astronomical figure of £22,503,532,372, and for the years 1945 to 46 the carrying charges alone amounted to £445,446,241. As an Irish economist remarked, only a Jewish-controlled organization would insist on the odd pound. 1 See Pear's Cyclopedia pages 514 and 647. 2 See Jewish Encyclopedia Volume 5, p. 41, 1925. It states Edom is in modern Jewry. Also Professor Lothrop Stoddard, the eminent ethnologist, states, the Jews' own records admit that 82% of those who subscribe to the political Zionist movement are Ashkenazim, so-called Jews, but not Semitic. There are many different opinions on these racial matters. 3 The Forrestal Diaries, Viking Press, New York, 1951. 4 Some readers claim Justinianus had no such purpose. I claim knowledge of wrong spurs men to create corrective legislation and laws. 5 The same evil influences are responsible for the same evil conditions which exist in all big cities today. 6 Bauer is the Jewish goldsmith who established the House of Rothschild in Frankfurt on the Main. He and his confreres plotted the French Revolution of 1789. 7 Because hate and revenge are the stock in trade of the forces of evil, they will use any pretext to foment wars and revolutions, even to using the name of God, whom they hate. 8 The book Aaron of Lincoln, Shapiro, Valentine and Co. gives interesting information regarding this period of history. Valentine's Jewish Encyclopedia has this to say: their numbers and prosperity increased. Aaron of Lincoln, whose house still stands to this day, became the richest man in England. His financial transactions covering the whole country and concerning many of the leading nobles and churchmen. On his death his properties passed to the Crown, and a special branch of the Exchequer had to be created to deal with the estates. 9. The statutes of Jewry were printed in detail as Appendix 1 in the Nameless War by Captain A.H.M. Ramsey. 10. Because the Jews were being evicted from all European countries, Kemmer, rabbi of Als in Provence, sought advice from the Sanhedrin then located in Constantinople. His appeal was dated January 13, 1489. The reply arrived back November 1459. It was signed VSS VFF Prince of the Jews. It advised the rabbis to use the tactics of the Trojan horse Christian and make their sons priests, laymen, lawyers, and doctors, etc. so they could destroy the Christian structure from within. 1 The Encyclopaedia Britannica on page 67, volume 13, 1947 has this to say: the 14th century was the golden age of the Jews in Spain. In 1391, the preaching of a priest of Seville, Fernando Martinet, led to the first general massacre of the Jews, who were envied for their prosperity and hated because they were the king's tax collectors. 12 This is dealt with more fully in the chapters on Spain. 13 H. G. Wells defines the differences very clearly in his Outline of History, pages 493 to 494. 14 It does even today. Illegal entry into the United States and into Palestine has reached unprecedented numbers since the end of World War II. Evidence will be produced to prove the underground is invariably associated with the antisocial characters who constitute the underworld. 15 Sombert's work The Jews and Modern Capitalism, and the Jewish Encyclopedia, bear out the above statement. 16 This policy has been common practice ever since. The Soviet embassies in every country have been turned into the headquarters of intrigue and espionage, as further evidence will prove. 17 This fact was commented upon in the Catholic Gazette in February of that year. 18 Charles was in custody at this time. 19 It is important to note that school history books make no mention of the two opposing groups of men who have been the secret power behind international affairs who made history. This policy seems to have been by tacit agreement. Author. 20 The outbreak of the Great Fire of London, known as the Great Cleaner, ended the plague. 21 The word Cabal is closely related to Kabbalah, a mysterious Hebrew theosophy dating back into antiquity but which became very active during the 10th and succeeding centuries. Kabbalah was announced as a special revelation which enabled rabbis to explain to the Jewish people the hidden meanings of the sacred writings. Pear's Cyclopedia 57th edition, page 529 says Kabbalism was later carried to great excess. Kabbalist leaders pretending to read signs and evidence in letters and forms and numbers contained in the scriptures. The French named this mysterious rite Cabal. The French used the term cabal to designate any group of political or private intriguers. The English coined the name cabal because the chief personages concerned with Kabbalistic intrigue in England were Clifford Ashley, Buckingham, Arlington, and Lauderdale, in that order. The first letter of their names spells Cabal. Kabbalists were the instigators of various forms of political and religious unrest during the unhappy reign of Charles II. 22 The identity of the men who control the Bank of England still remains a secret. The Macmillan Committee appointed in 1929 to throw light on the subject failed completely. Mr. Montague Norman, the official head of the Bank of England, was most evasive and noncommittal in any answer he made to the committee. For further particulars, read Facts About the Bank of England by A.N. Field, p. 23 If such a policy is carried to its logical conclusion, it is only a matter of time before the international moneylenders control the wealth, natural resources, and manpower of the entire world. History shows how rapidly they have progressed toward their goal since 1694. 24 The Duke is the direct ancestor of Sir Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of England today. I.e. 1954 Churchill is self-acknowledged as having been the foremost Zionist of this era. He is the man most responsible for influencing the United Nations to create the State of Israel. Guy Carpons in the Game Chapter 3 The men who caused the French Revolution 1789 in the previous chapter.
Give thanks and praise. Give thanks and praise. give thanks and praise. Information share. We always know the truth out there, but distraction and untruth is also out there. And I say, if the truth is in a book, our people will miss it. Why? The book and the pictures. Our people like comic material, comical narrative. When the truth presents itself, then we get cognitive dissonance. So again, with a share information, sharing our truth. Yeah, man. So we can have enough information and choose to exercise tolerance. And our exercising of tolerance is amongst ourselves. Yeah, we have to choose to tolerate each other. Well, I'm gonna come to that conclusion, say, irrespective of what was and how it is now, if we as a people now exercise some form of tolerance, then the divide and conquer go mash we up. However, we know it's difficult. Yeah, when we have different ideology, it's gonna be difficult. But that is one of the secrets still. Yeah. Irrespective of who we are, if we have one common view, common goal, freedom in and freedom in, then we should be able to exercise tolerance on that ground. Yeah, the Maroon, the Moor, the Rasta, the Christian, the Israelite, us. All of these things are just labels. We are man before we can, ascribe any kind of label to ourselves. So as each one teach one step by step, and I love this kind of information because this will come from people who truly apply themselves, truly in a position to speak on these topics. And it's just our, responsibility now to ascertain this kind of information so we have it. So we're not out here and know what is what, who is who, and, totally lost. But again, when we not have no fanfare, or we not have no big giveaway, or we not talk about this is where you get the money, people will miss them kind of information. And people, like I said, them want financial security when them not realize just that very desire is where I condemn with. Because who control these imaginary finances? The international money lenders, these international bankers, these fictitious characters. Yeah, man, this is why the IMF, by way of the Labour Party, was instituted around here. So when we share information like this, yes, it's a Winston Churchill is that scoundrel, that Zionist. Yes, it's a CROMWELL, all these guys. Scoundrel, Zionists. These are agent saboteurs. These are instrument of the Luciferian agenda. These people are, synagogue of Satan, and them deceive our people. In fact, them deceive all people. And this is why we have so much division, because we now have certain kind of truth, certain foundational truth for know who the true adversary is, who the true enemy is. Yeah, man. And every time I'm telling us that adversarial energy are derived from the northern region. Yeah, it'll come out of the north. Yeah, man. But again, because of some of our conditioning, we now go have interest in these things. Not until our back is against the wall. Not until Babylon says, let's turn off that internet now. Yeah, man. And whoever is out. But whoever we get caught in our net, yeah, that's when people are going to start pay attention and avoid a lot of other distraction, but then it shall be too late. Anyway, it's always a great time to be in existence because we get this opportunity to look, listen, and learn. And we'll go even a little far where we can share. Free will out there, to each his own. Again, free will, to each his own. Every one of us stand up. Yeah, so a lot of us have to forgive some of the people and when them not allow you guys to just live vicariously through them. Everyone will have to stand. Everyone will have to be accountable for their own actions. Yeah, man. Everyone. Choose wise out the people. Knowledge over ignorance. Again, information share. The English Revolution. People think them know. And when the truth come forward, then it's ignored. And then people claim ignorance. We burn these foreign energy. We burn the Luciferian energy there. We burn the satanic energy there. We burn the people and the synagogue of Satan. Yeah. If I people afraid to identify them and burn them, I burn them. Those Jewish money lenders. Those culprits. This is why our politicians are like this. Look at the agenda. It has come from their foreign masters. And when you hear the British Empire, no, it's the very same Roman moneylenders. This is the battle that has been waging from time immemorial. Good over evil. So they may have to spoil us so we can't even know good from evil. So the evil purport itself as good and spoil our people. But like the idea of free will, you have to look, you have to decide, you have to choose. Every man is responsible for his own action. Give thanks. Give thanks. Give thanks. Not pampering. Our people like too much soda. Yeah, man. And this is why, as they say, 2/3 shall perish. And them are going to perish voluntarily. Yeah, God, it's always a voluntary act. You got to choose to go down that path. You got to choose to go down that road. And you got to choose your own destruction. And then you got to cry, ignorance. I didn't know, lack of knowledge. And even that shall be a lie. Yeah. It always been written, said, the earth I gonna know. For the truth have to be in the earth. And the earth shall know the truth. And the truth are gonna make those who know it free. That's it. Wise up. Rise up. It's a personal thing. Yeah, man, it's a personal revolution. Yeah. If you're not free yourself first, then forget about the rest. Salute.